That's what you get, right? This is what we gave you. And then as you start putting stuff in your script, microseconds later, right, if you had the script at the top, it would do that first. Because the script tag, all it really does is copies that script code into your HTML. So it's almost as if you were writing the script inside.
Oh.
So that's rendering it in the order that it finds it in that file.
We good, Carolyn.
Yeah, okay. So we're going to start by looking at the README for homework 3. We're going to go through that, and I'm going to explain what I want from you guys. This is a great time for you to interrupt and ask questions, something that's not clear, and then we're going to go through and see what we gave you in the code. And you guys can ask questions there. Okay, so the idea here is we're going to have 3 separate things. We have an info panel that is pretty much just text elements, right? Then we have a bar chart, very similar to the bar chart we've done in homework 2, but the data here that we're going to change what data we put on the Y. We can put any of the various attributes that are in our data set, and we have a map, okay? These, you're able to render these separately before you get into interaction, right? You load in your data, you make your bar chart, you make your map, you update the info panel. Then go back and you're gonna change it so that every time you click on a bar, that changes your map. And that's how those two are gonna talk. When you're done with that, the extra credit assignment is to make the map interactive. So you can actually click on, this is really well, maybe these lights a little bit. Pick a button, any button. There's not a button. That's the button.
No, that's the monitor.
That's the button. Oh, that's definitely not. So the extra credit is going to be clicking on any of these countries will actually update your
Wait, but a new
info
field,
panel.
right?
Huh?
I thought it said to make a new panel.
No, you add it to the panel.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. If you make a new panel, that's not the worst thing, but okay. So those are the 3 parts. We're going to go through each one of them. So this is what we give you. We give you the HTML. This is what the HTML looks like if you only open that HTML file, okay? So we give you a title. Like in the other homeworks, you go in and you replace your name, your email, your UID here. Now if we look at what that HTML looks like, notice that we have things like the World Cup title, the host, they have IDs. These IDs are very, well IDs, what can you use IDs for? Selection, right? So this is a really great way that you can pick it when you're going to update it. You're going to use this ID, just like we've done in the past. So you have here, notice, conveniently, an ID for the title, an ID for the host, for the winner, for the silver, and for the teams, which happen to be the fields that we want you to update when you load in the data, okay? These are going to be specific to every year. So these are only going to be populated when what happens?
Year is chosen.
When the year is chosen, which means when you click on one of those rectangles, right? Trying to remember, homework 2 seems like eons ago for me. You guys had callbacks on homework 2, right? If, like on, was it hover? Was it on click?
On hover.
On click or on hover. It's the same concept, right? Right. So you might want to use that same idea for each one of your bars, right? And then when you click on it, you update this panel here. So that's pretty much the info panel. It's pretty straightforward. Any questions so far? No, that's great. Okay, so you're not changing your HTML file. Then we give you a script.js. We give you styles. You're not messing with those either. Assets and data. Assets is pretty much things that we include. For example, this logo right here. You don't have to mess with it. It's just in there so that it renders properly. The fonts that we use. These are the fonts for the 2014 maybe. I don't remember. It's the official font of whatever.
Oh, the FIFA World Cup.
Yeah. Yeah.
No.
That's Alex's idea. I thought that was great. I gave him an HTML and he returns it to me. I'm like, oh, nice.
That's pretty
We
cool.
found the font. Yeah.
Is assets also like I don't think consensus is the word that I'm looking for. Is that standard just to call your, it's a directory, right?
Yeah, it is a directory. Yeah, it's a directory that has all the stuff in it. So you don't have to worry about what's in assets. And figures is also, don't worry about what's in there.
Styles.css.
So styles.css. Do you remember in homework 2, let's open this up. Actually, why don't we just open up styles.css. So here we are this is what styles.css looks like, right? So it pretty much is telling you how to style each one of these classes and things to make it look pretty. Notice, and this is something I'm going to bring up later, you know how we had IDs and that was really useful to grab and change the content of those things? We have conveniently named classes: countries, legends, teams, host, gold, and silver. When we get to the map part, and we'll talk about that, one of the things you have to do is create a marker for the gold, right, and for the silver, and that's actually what, do we not have a completed, yeah we do. See here, this marker? That's a gold marker, that's a silver marker. We highly encourage you to use any kind of styling. Use that with a style, like a .css, an actual, use a class whose style is defined in either a style.css or on the top of your page. Now, so far we've had the CSS defined in a style bracket in the HTML, right? But it's bigger, it's getting bigger, and we're getting more fancy, and now we have a color for the host, we have a color for participating countries. So for your HTML file not to have to be scrolled through all the styling to get the HTML, you do a separate file, and that's why this one is called style.css. So this is a great place to go and look at what we've already defined, aesthetics for countries, so that way you know, well, you know, I should probably add this class to my marker so it looks like that. Yes?
Now, I think in homework 2, we did a lot of styling using D3. So when the style changed, we used D3.
Yes.
And I might be drawing a blank now,
Right.
but I assume that you could also use D3 to reference
Yes.
the CSS.
Yes. So that was a very good point. There's two different ways of setting the style, right? One is d3.select, and you select your bar, or your marker, or whatever, .attribute, color red, right? So that red is inside your JavaScript. But having it there means that if you ever want to change it, you need to go back everywhere where you set it to red. So a slightly more elegant way of doing it is, this is going to be my red markers. So I'm going to call it .class, red markers, and in my CSS, I say that all my .red markers have the color of red. They both have the same final effect, but it's considered better programming, especially if you do it more than one place. Anytime you're repeating code, you want to extract that, you want to put it somewhere else, that's why we use these classes. Of course, you're not going to create a different class for every bar, right? Let's suppose you want to have a bar that has random colors, or the bar color is defined by data. If the bar color is defined by data, then we're not using classes, because then we're going to do set, attribute, color, function of D, Y, color scale D. Does that make sense? The sentence I just say makes sense? Because I kind of went really fast with that. Okay. But if it's consistently going to be red, then you want to style it. Yes?
Now, how do we include an external CSS file in the HTML?
Okay, so if you look at, let's take a look at we don't have the solution.
Yeah, we do.
So we want to look,
What's the
go
question
back
again?
here. Yeah.
External CSS files and how to include them.
Yeah,
Oh, okay, how it's like, kind of like referencing JavaScript or
right
something?
here. Okay, that's a very good question. So when we do it as a separate file, you're going to link to it, and that just means it now has access to all that information. Okay, and we've provided here a styles with conveniently named labels. Yes?
So when you're calling a class inside your D3 to like set a color or something, do you just do set attribute or attribute dot and then the class name?
That's a very good question. So here, there's a slightly different concept. One, you are setting the color to red, so it's an attribute. The class is not, well, you can set it as an attribute. But remember when we saw .classed?
Yeah.
There's two ways of setting a class. .classed, and you put the name of the class and you use true, or .attribute class and the name of the class, right? But now you're pretty much just saying everything that's associated to this class, associated to this element. So it could be more than color. It could be color, stroke width, size, and that's when the styles.css starts becoming particularly, see, these are pretty straightforward. Your countries has a stroke and a fill, your team has a fill, your background has a fill. But for example, when we were designing the marker for gold, we wanted it to be kind of semi-opaque, we wanted it to have a certain color, a stroke, and a stroke width. Now, those are 4 attributes, and we want everything that's to be called .gold to have that. So let's suppose we had more than one gold. All you have to do is assign it to gold class, and it has all of those attributes. If we were doing it with D3, every time you did that, you would have 4 .attribute lines for the width, for the opacity. And then you go, you know what, .8 is a little too much, I'm going to go back to 1. You're changing it in 4 places. So it's very easy to quickly accumulate enough styling that you want to take that out and put that in a style.css.
Can we modify what's in the CSS from the JavaScript?
That's a good question. The .css file itself, or the .css, or the style
Just the
attributes of a property?
Style
Okay.
attributes.
Yes, you can.
Okay.
Yeah, but so you have conflicting things, right? You have what is defined in the .css, and then you want to override it with something, for example.
Yeah.
Yes, you can.
Okay.
So which one gets precedence?
I think the inline takes precedence over the CSS, but that's an easy Google. I'm not really sure. You can
Inline-
test it.
Inline would be D3 or JavaScript.
Yeah, inline means that you're putting it in your HTML.
Should be whatever happens second, right?
Well, and well, if that were the case, then CSS always happens first, right? Because that's like defined before you even run your code.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I understood your answer for the D3 and class. Do you use class or an attribute to specify a class and
They
then,
both do the same thing.
okay,
So the nice thing about classed is it's a toggle on and off. So you can do, and you can check if it has a certain class by doing classed and just the class name. That will give you true or false.
okay.
And if you want, if it's false, you might want to set it to true and true to false. Not in this homework, you're not going to do that kind of toggling. But the idea of using classed, it gives you true or false once you just give it a class name, and then you can set it to be true or false with that syntax. There
Okay.
are just two ways of doing it.
And then all of the parameters for the class.
Get turned on or off.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you don't have to do anything with attributes for that?
No.
Okay.
Okay. So, let me just go back. Okay, so now we know what styles.css does and how it helps you. The script.js, we're going to take a look at what's included there. Not much. That's pretty much where you're going to do all your work. The HTML file that just gives you the divs, the elements, and things that have IDs. I don't believe, I'm 90% sure, that you have to, I don't think you do. You don't have to tag anything that's not already tagged. In other words, you're able to select everything you need with the IDs that we've given you. IDs and classes, okay? Similar to homework 2. You guys do this in homework 2? The Python server? Yes, right? Yeah, so if you just open the HTML, it can't access the data that's in a separate file, or the CSS, anything that's in a separate file. So run that. That's not me. Okay, so here we have, oh, it says GeoJSON, it's not, it's TopoJSON. Yeah. Sorry, this was an adaptive README and we didn't change that. I'll update that. But, so now we have the World Cup data. Actually, no, the World Cup data is, the world.json is a TopoJSON file, okay? And today in class, I pretty much gave you guys the answer on how to read that in, because it can get a little complicated. But the idea being we want these features. So if you don't remember what the syntax is, you can go back through the slides, they're in the Canvas announcement. That's how you extract features from your data and you give it into GeoPath. So anyway, before we go into the specifics of the map, this is what we give you. We give you, sorry.
Go ahead, say that.
So we have a CSV file, comma, separated values for the World Cup. And they are, homework 3 data. They look like that.
Oh, sweet.
Okay, so it pretty much has an addition. An addition is another word for a title. So you have a title, and this is what you're going to want to display up in that title field, in that info bar. Then you have the year, you have a host, host country code, winner, win latitude, win longitude, runner-up, and so forth.
I think you handled reading all that in for us. Like,
I do, but the reason that you want to know is just so you understand how we go from this to actual data in a format that we can plot, right? Because there's a little bit of a leap here. We have a CSV file, and all of a sudden our D3 is plotting data attributes. How do we go from this CSV? And it's important to understand, how are we telling, remember how in the bar charts, you guys are gonna have to say which attribute you're plotting? Are you going back to your CSV file?
No.
No, right? So we're gonna look at how it loads and how it stores it, but if you understand that, it makes that process a lot easier.
That is interesting, because like, I'm assuming we're not looping over the entire data field for host, for example, every
No,
time.
you're not, absolutely.
Maybe it's being seen there.
So we're gonna go and look at that code real quick, but this is what your CSV file looks like. So we gave you that World Cup CSV, and we give you a world.json, which is a TopoJSON file. We're gonna look at how that reads in. So before we go to the bar chart, actually, let's look at how we read in that CSV file. So that is in here. So this is where we're reading in the CSV file, right? So for each line in the CSV, we convert all of these to numeric values.
That's the plus, right?
That's what the plus is. It makes sure that it's not a string. Okay, so it interprets that and makes it into an integer and stores it in d.year, d.teams. They're all, the same names.
As an array, is it stored as an array?
No, it stores it as objects where year is one attribute, teams, matches. So see this D, we use this D everywhere, right? Whenever you have a function inside D3 in the callback, we usually say function D. D is a data element, right? A data element has as many fields as we want. Now, when we read in the CSV, do you remember the columns? There was all those, right? We don't necessarily need to use all of those. So here what we're doing is we're saying, okay, these are the ones that we're creating. Now, notice we're creating these. We don't have d.addition in here, right? We don't necessarily need to go through and create one for every column. These are the ones that we're manipulating in any way before we store them in this D. So D represents each attribute, each element, each object, each chunk of data that has as many attributes as you have columns in your CSV file.
So D is an object of arrays?
D is actually the individual line in CSV and object in D3. Okay? Now, if you didn't do anything and you didn't have the CSV dot for each, then when you read that in, it will assume that your headers are your field names. Okay? So when you read in a CSV, D dot, anything that you have in your header will give you the element at that location.
So I'm still
Yeah.
a little lost. So the way I look at this code, we say d.year equals d.year, and that means it's already stored there, so why do we have to store it again?
That's a very good point. Two things are happening here. One is we're changing it to a lowercase for no reason. We just think it looks better.
Okay.
But see that little plus in front of the d.year? That is forcing that to be an integer,
Okay.
because we want that year to be an integer, right? In this case, it already is. It's almost like just good practice to make sure that that number is going to be an integer. But you're right. If that's a d.year equals d.year, you would be doing nothing. And you would get, if you didn't do it, you would still have d.year.
Okay.
And one thing you can test, I mean, honestly, I don't think you should waste time with this, but if you wanted to try it, take that line out, and then just try to use d.year with a capital. And that everything should work. But if you ever had a value in there that was a string, that would break. Okay? Now notice that, so we make sure all these numbers are actual integers. Then we create a winning position and a runner-up position array of 2 elements. And that has the longitude and latitude of the winners for that given year. Now we give you that because you're going to need that when you scroll back here and you're going to tell me
Oh, 'cause
what you're going to use
Optimal.
that for.
we need it in that format of a two-number array.
Yes, to
Okay.
plot what?
Marker.
Yes, these markers, right? You need to tell me who the winner was, and you need to put a marker, and that marker needs to have the geographic location. So that's what that attribute is.
Cool.
It's the latitude and longitude of the winner and the runner-up. Here, it's just the syntax that you need. If you go back to the CSV file, you'll see that the way we have this, and this was a pain to put together, so please appreciate this, is that for each country, we have the list, for each year, we have the list of all the countries that participated.
Did you do that manually?
Well, I did a little MATLAB coding because I'm better at MATLAB than I am at Python. And then the ISO codes. And I'll tell you why we have to use the ISO codes for those. But anyway, so that's what, it was a list, right? And we want it to be, so if we go back here in the code, it'll parse this into a JavaScript array. It's just a syntax thing. It's still a list, but it's no longer a comma-separated list. It's now a JavaScript array. Each one has its own item. So you're going to be using those when you color things, because you want the ones that are part of that year, the participants. If I ever say anything that doesn't make sense, please raise your hand. Okay? Yeah.
What does the columns operator do?
Yeah, it's
Or
just
element.
grabbing the columns from what is output by d3.csv parse. Yeah, don't worry about it.
Okay.
Okay? Okay, so then we've gone through, we've made all these modifications to CSV. CSV is the name of the object that d3.csv generates, right? So we go through, we're modifying this CSV, and then we're assigning it to all World Cup data. And that's a global variable, so you can access that from any of your functions. Okay? Then we're going to go ahead and update the bar chart with this string attendance. Yes?
Sorry, what was the team's ISO?
Oh, so the team ISO is pretty much the country code for all the teams that participated. And you're going to use that when you're coloring things differently. Okay, so update bar chart attendance. Does anyone remember what was one of the things about how can we interact with the bar chart? You can click on them or you can.
Drop down.
There's the drop-down menu. Remember that he showed in class today, actually? So if we go here, one of the ways you interact with the bar chart is this, right? So slow, oh my goodness. So that means that when you're updating your bar chart, you need to know, you want to update it to what attribute, right? So you want to update, and so what's changing here is the Y. So what's changing here is what is the attribute that we use for, when I say the Y, what does that mean in terms of what you're actually going to input that in? What changes here? Yes, the size of the bars. How do we, do you remember from homework 2, how do you determine that, the actual size on the screen of a bar? A scale, right? So for us to make that scale, size those things properly, we need to know what is the attribute that we're actually showing here, right? So that is we're going to start it off with attendance. So when you actually code up this part, that's what that selected dimension is. Because that is the field that you were going to grab from your data to make your Y scales and to determine the height of your bar. Okay? Great, well you're halfway done. We have the world, we have the CSV read in, and we understand what this selected variable, how do we call it? Selected dimension, yes. Okay, so let's go back to this. So we read that in, and now we're going to talk about the bar chart. So the first thing you're going to do is code this up. And before you even code how it reacts to the drop-down menu, it's assumed that it's attendance, right? So you're going to go ahead and code it with that variable. After you code what happens when you do the drop-down, which is pretty straightforward because you're just telling it, call this function when you detect a change. You're really just going to be passing in different attributes for, I think I heard you, someone? For the selected dimension, right? It's going to do the same thing. It's just going to change what it does it on, which is that one variable. It can be any of those 4 things: attendance, goals, games, and participants. Now here's a question for you. Given your knowledge of this, see, look at that. Notice how we put in the string attendance. When someone changes that drop-down menu, now they want to do goals. What is the string that's going to go in there? And how do you spell it? And is it uppercase? Is it lowercase? Does it matter? What do we do with that attendance string? Do we do an if for? If this, then this. If this, then this? You could. That's not the best way of doing it. How do we translate the fact that someone wants to plot attendance to actually plotting attendance?
It's an index to the data.
Say that again?
It's used as an index to the data.
It's an index, but it's not an index in a numeric sense, right? It's an index in what sense?
Map,
It's the name of a,
column.
it's an actual name of one of the fields. See, d.attendance? So what you're doing is you're actually going in and saying, grab this field, okay? You could hypothetically say, if someone says goals, if someone misspells goals, if it starts with a G, let's suppose you were doing it that way, right? Then you want to go in and you want to grab d.goals. That's just a lot of lines. If you just give it always the string that matches the name of the attribute in the data, it makes your life a lot easier. Alex is going to watch this video and think I gave away too much, so I'm going to stop. Okay, so then,
Stop the camera.
okay, so you implement your bar chart. That's easy, right? You just implement that. That's very similar that you did homework 2, right? At this point, you have data. You do X scale, you do a Y scale, you do an X axis, a Y axis, and your height of your bar is going to be a function of D, select the dimension. So here you're going to color the bars. Notice that they are not the same blue. There's these lovely shades of blue. So it's double encoding, right? The same thing. The height of your bar is proportional to the value of whatever you're plotting, as is the color. So you have a color scale. So this is an example where you can't color with classes, with styles, right? I mean, it is a style, sorry, with styles defined by classes, because every bar has a different color based on its own value. The value of the attribute that you that you select or passed in as the argument to update bar chart.
What's all the speckle in the
Yeah.
bars?
Looks like
Is that just because of how it's rendering? Because
We thought it looked nice. No, I'm just kidding. It's really just a resolution thing. We did a screen capture. We did one of those GIFs, and so it probably just,
okay.
you don't have to
I thought
do
it was a
that.
texture thing too, I was like,
Yeah.
what's up with the?
That's the
Do I
extra
have to
credit.
do that?
Add a,
Dot.
yes, an optical illusion if you hold it closer or far away from your, okay. So you're gonna make your bar chart, it's gonna update with the new selected dimension, and then when you're done, you're gonna have this. Okay, so that is, I believe, half of your homework. No, almost. It's a good portion of your homework. Okay. So here, we have, and this part where it's going to react to, your bar responds to, oh no, this is where you actually click on it. When you click on a bar, you want it to do something else, right? The do something else is the whole map portion, interacting with the map. But for getting credit for selecting a World Cup and what happens, what you need to do is have it properly respond when you click on it. So on click, do something, okay? Now, syntax-wise, there was actually something that came up a little bit on homework 2. There's 2 ways you can do it. Anonymous function, or by calling a function that you write elsewhere, right? So if you do on click my favorite function, it's then gonna go and call my favorite function. But for that you need, right? Anyway. And another way of doing it is on click, function di, and you write the function right there in the callback. So those are 2 ways. Usually, if it's long, you don't write it as an anonymous function, you write it as a separate one and call it. If it's short, like all you want to do is display I was here, then you do it as an anonymous function. And by anonymous, it just means it doesn't have a name. It's only defined and it disappears outside of the context of that callback. Okay? Okay, the info panel is like what we were saying before. Whenever you click on one of those rectangles, 2 things are happening. You are updating the map, and you're updating your info panel. So you're updating what shows up here, right? Now, as easy as it is to grab an ID and update the text, remember, you're not appending to it, so you're not, that list should not be growing. You don't have to do any fancy transitions. You just need to define what is the text that goes into each one of those IDs, okay? That one should not take you too long. Okay, then we get to the map. So the map is not hard, we just need to understand that what we're doing is we're creating path elements, just like we did in the example. But the difference is we're not creating one big path element for the entire world. If you look at the examples that we've looked at in lecture, it's one feature for the entire, so this is one pencil, you know, that move, it's just drawing the entire world. And that looks the same, but then has the disadvantage that you cannot select individual countries. Now, because one of the interaction is you want to color countries differently based on if they were the host, if they were participants, we then need to create separate path elements for every feature. And this is where, I'm actually just going to bring this up real quick. This comes up, this right here. The data, we're going to go through and create paths very similar to what we have in the examples. If you look at the examples, you can recreate it. And you can probably even recreate the entire world with one call. The problem is that we do want to, the reason we're doing it this way is because each country needs to be a separate feature and therefore a separate data element, okay? Now, that part is, you can make that work pretty easily. Let me go through and see how much we wrote about this in terms of the clues that we gave you in terms of giving each one IDs. So anyway, it's inside the draw map, so let's open that up in the HTML. Let me just go up here. So you've done the update the bar chart. This is the selection for the drop down. This is updating that little info panel. And now you're drawing the map, right? So we gave you a projection. We played around with a million projections. And we figured this one looked good, so you could just use that one. You can play around with different ones, but they don't look as nice. So you're gonna create a map And you can very much follow the syntax, like I said, that we use in class to start off. Now, each one of the features that you feed into the .data operator, you can do anything you want to it, right? Because it's one of the D elements. So when you do attribute D, attribute something, function of D, you can give it classes, you can style it. So if you wanted to make all your countries red, when you create those paths and you added a line, .attribute red, every country would be red. Okay? We want all of the countries to have a certain look. So like I said, if you go back to your CSS, you'll see that we created a class called .countries. And that makes it that nice light gray and has that slightly darker stroke. Okay? You can tell a lot of effort went into styling these. You can create a new .countries and style it any way you want, but if you want it to look like ours, that's what you use. Then you notice that we have two other classes, team and host. Okay? Coincidentally, those are the two categories that we want you to color. We want you to color the host in blue, and we want you to color the team. And by team, it means participating team, okay? The host is obviously a team as well. So, like it says here, the classes are meant to facilitate the task of styling each country path element. So, all of them should have a country's class. Thinking about how to phrase this. You have to be able to select a specific country, right? Because the information that you have is who won, or not who won, sorry, who hosted. And you have a list of people who participated. You want to be able to color the person who hosted by attributing that country, the class, .host. How are you going to find that path element after you created all of them? How do we differentiate path elements that we later want to go back and grab? IDs. Why IDs and not classes? And that's an important distinction. When do you use classes, when you use IDs? IDs are unique. Classes are not. Classes mean everything that's a certain type. Let's make that a class. It just so happens that we only have one winner. We made it a winner class. We could have made it a winner ID. You know how when we were styling those circles, winner, gold, gold and silver, those are classes. They could have been IDs. There's just one of them. But every country, there's only one of them. And you're going to have to go back. When I tell you that Brazil won, you need to go back and find the Brazilian country, and that's a path element. So when you're creating these countries, what do you want to do? You want to give them IDs, because it's going to make it a lot easier. Because if you don't, what you would have to do is go back, cycle through every existing country, and somehow, I don't know if they have a title property actually, but let's suppose they did, and then check, does it match with the one that's winning? Right? That's computationally not smart. You know you're going to have to go back and be able to, on the fly, pick Brazil, pick Brazil, pick Brazil. So then, so when you're creating them, when you're creating this map, you're assigning everything to countries, and you're giving them IDs.
So
Okay?
you have a loop and do an if statement or something.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's going to make it a hassle. Now this is where your ISO comes in. The ISO is very useful. The ISO is the three character country code, and we give that to you. So every country has an ISO. Yep. This ISO is the same thing as this ID here. See how we said since there's only one of each country, we can use IDs to tag them. The ID field provided in the JSON data might come in handy. So one of the fields, and this is a great way to get to know your data. Let's suppose I hadn't told you this, and it wasn't written in the spec. When you read in your data, you know how today in class when we were talking about TopoJSON, I did console.log and I showed you the screenshot of what's in there? That's a great way of finding out what are the properties that I have access to for a given data file. So when you guys load in world.json, I highly recommend you do load world.json, console.log world.json. And then you can go in and you can see what are all the properties you have, IDs, population, whatever else, right? And you can later use them for something like this, so like tagging them or giving them IDs. Okay, so you created your map, you gave your country paths the appropriate classes and IDs, and now you're going to encode the bit where you click on it before. You already encoded what happens when you click on the bar. It's a callback, right? So you're going to go back into that callback, and now so we've created the map. Now we need to update the map. And that's a whole nother thing, because when you create the map, you're setting up the behind the scenes, you drew it, you gave it IDs to your classes, but nothing changed on your map. Then you're gonna call, so that's draw map, and then we have where's our update map? Update map, right here. Okay? And these are the things you're doing when you update the map. The update the map happens when you click on a bar. You are going to add the marker for the winner and the runner-up. And then here I talk about the two class labels, .winner and .silver. So as long as they have that right class, they're going to look the way they should. You're going to select the host country, so this is where actually having every country have a little tag is going to be useful, and you're going to change its color. You're going to go through all the participating teams, and you're going to change their colors. And so like I said, we strongly suggest using classes. When I say change their color, maybe the first idea is, ooh, I selected it, I'm going to .attribute, .style, .blue, not .blue, blue. That works, but we've given you classes that have exactly the way they should look. So use those, okay? There's a lot of using of classes. And then you're done. Oh no, there's the clear map, yeah. So clear map is pretty much, and the reason we have a clear map is that when we first implemented this, we did this as a hover thing, right? When you hovered over a bar, it would do that. When you hovered away from a bar, it would disappear. So we have a function that will actually clear everything out. In this case, you're only clicking. So if there's no reason why the act of clearing up the map only happens right before you refresh it for the next click. So in this case, we have it separated out. You could very well have just at the beginning of your update map put in all of the code that clears the map. We just separated it out because we wanted to be able to call it separately if we did a hover on, hover off. Hover on would be make map, hover off would be clear map. But in this case, because it's click, it's all one thing. So in case you were wondering why it's separated as another function, I'm sure nobody was, but there you have it.
It makes sense now that you explain it, so.
No, there you go. And that's it. And that's all we need from homework 3. So let me go back to, let me see if there's anything we didn't see, and done. So yeah, the clear map is pretty much going to remove all the highlighting. When I say clear, please don't delete elements. You know, I think one of the things that, even I did this when I first learned D3, which was like with text elements, right? D3, select all text, .remove. D3, .select, append, enter, and you start again. That works. That's really not the concept of D3, is take the elements that exist and modify them. So if you have countries that you've selected and that you have colored in blue, just turn the class on and off. Please don't delete the country and draw it again. That works, but that's just not the way it should be done, okay? The idea of classes is you can style it very easily. So the less you specify and do things brute force in the code and just use the classes, the happier you will be. And then when you're done with all that, there's an extra credit where you can actually click on any of the countries, and then that's going to display information like were they ever winners or runner-up. So you're going to go through your data and search, and that part's really not that important. The important thing is you make it respond to the click, and then you append that to your information, your summary, your this over here. Just for the sake of, I know, even if people don't do the extra credit, when are you going to be setting the callback function for those countries? When would you set that? So you create the country. What are countries as far as, well, it sounds very metaphysical, right? What are countries really? Why are we here? What are countries in terms of our elements? Is it a, it's a path, exactly, it's a path. Every country is a path element.
So they're not objects.
Well, the data that went into them is an object, but as far as on the screen, they are a path. If you do inspect element on the country, it's a path that has that little move, whatever, right? When you create that path, what are we going to do for this homework, not the extra credit? What is important that that path have? Right? IDs and the class countries, right? Those are the two things we want to give it. While we are creating it, we could also hypothetically do what? Same thing we did with the rectangles.
Give it a callback.
Give it a callback. Right? So you're going to add one more line. You're creating it. You're giving it a class. And you know what? I decided that on hover, I wanted to display, this is Mexico. Okay? Okay? It's just one more line, and we're gonna do it when we create them, because now you're associating this callback to every one of these separate path objects that represent countries. And then you write the code as what you want it to do when it actually does that, right? The idea is to think that whatever you do to one, it's iterating and doing it through all of them. So what we did before with very simple bar charts, you can do with anything that you're creating. In this case, we're creating countries. And we want the countries to give me a motivational quote every time I click on it. Okay? And that's how you do it.
And callback, you mean event, right?
I mean a function, yes, you just specify the event that happens on some kind of behavior. And that's it. Any questions?
Yeah, I got one. Can we look at the CSS styles again? So, in the country styles, the team and I think it was host seemed like they were implemented like subclasses. Maybe I'm thinking of something different.
Like right there.
Okay, I answered my question.
Okay.
Pretty good.
Okay, well, thanks for coming. Do come to office hours. We have so many office hours. We have 6 hours of office hours. So show up and good luck. They're on the homepage on the website.
They changed the announcement.
Oh, yeah, because we